Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this IMI2 content webinar on the topic Understanding Hypoglycemia. My name is Alessandra Paccamicio. I am part of the IMI communications team, and I will briefly explain how to use GoToWebinar. My colleague Colin Carroll from the IMI scientific team will then provide an introduction to the call, and the topic will be explained by Erika Nishimura from Novo Nordisk. At the end, we will have time for questions and answers. So when you open the webinar application, you should have already seen a menu option. You can choose computer audio to connect to this webinar or a phone call. During the course of the webinar, you can switch between the two systems if you have a problem with any of the two options. And please, if you're using your computer audio, make sure that your speakers are switched on and not muted in case you want to ask questions. And you can also test your sound to make sure that GoToWebinar is picking up the right speakers. The panel that you should see on the top right of your screen is either a minimized version or an expanded version. You have a few buttons on the left-hand side of the panel to expand and minimize the panel. The microphone muted or unmuted. It's a listen-only mode at the moment, therefore gray. It will become green if we unmute you to ask any questions. A full screen button, and then last but not least, a raise or lower your hand button that you can use to ask any questions or attract our attention in case of any difficulties throughout the webinar. Asking questions is very easy. You can either ask a question in writing, typing in your text and clicking send, or else using the raise and lower hand button. Therefore, we can bring you live to the discussion and unmute you. Before we start, let me remind you that this webinar may be recorded and published on the IMI website and or IMI YouTube channel. The presentation slides will be published on the webinar webpage, and the participant list will be circulated. Now we'll leave the floor to my colleague Colin Carroll from the IMI scientific team.
Thank you, Alessandra. So my name is Colin Carroll, and as Alessandra has already said, I'm going to bring you through kind of some general background to how IMI develops our call topics, so you get a good understanding of what we are as an organization, and then also give you a few tips on how to put forward a successful proposal. This slide here has got what we're going to cover. So Erika will cover most of the issues on the topic itself. One thing, so I will not go into detail on those. We will also not cover any of the rules regarding how to apply or the rules regarding financial rules and so on. However, we will have a specific webinar on the 9th of January where we'll go into detail on these rules and procedures, and there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions as well. So if you are interested in that, please do attend on the 9th of January at 2 p.m. Brussels time, and the web link is there, which will be available in the slides that get circulated later. So first of all, who are we? What is the Innovative Medicines Initiative? So we're a large public-private partnership where the public part is the European Commission and the private part is mostly FPA, which is the Pharmaceutical Industry Association, but also includes other types of organizations, and in this specific topic you will see there are a number of what we call associated partners involved. Our aim is to facilitate open collaborative research and to kind of address topics which are a little bit too difficult, too challenging for particular industries to tackle by themselves, somewhere where you need the strength, the financial strength and the expertise strength of a collaborative partnership between public partners and private partners. The aim is to focus on developing, well, the ultimate aim is to focus on developing medicines and giving patients better health and better well-being. Those of you who are familiar with IMI will realize that when we started, our focus was much more on the earlier stages of research. However, now as we've moved, as we've evolved, we're very much focused on how the outcomes of our projects have an impact on the patients. So when you're putting together a proposal, you should bear in mind this is quite important for us. In a bit more detail, we'd like to see ourselves as a platform to allow these multidisciplinary consortia to form and carry out quite ambitious research. And as I said already, we can tackle problems with a large scale by both having quite a lot of financial muscle, but also being able to get the right expertises together, and the right expertises from a broad variety of sectors as well. So a typical IMI project could include not just the industry partners, not just academics, but maybe also regulators, health technology assessment organizations, patient groups, for example, and so on. And the key is that, you know, by combining all these different groups, and all these different groups will have different ways of working and different types of expertise, but by bringing them all together under one project where everyone shares all their expertise and data and results freely, you can really take a large step forward. So now I have a number of slides here which explain how our topics are developed and how they're evaluated all the way through to a project launch. And these are quite important, so I'll go through them a little bit slowly. And the reason they're important is that although we fit under the European Commission Horizon 2020 program, we do have some little differences, and these differences are quite important for you to realize when you're putting your proposal together. And these differences are mostly around the aspect of the public-private partnership, so to include the private element. And the first difference is how our topics are defined. Our topics are defined by these groups called strategic governance groups, and these are groups of industry companies, pharma companies, and others who come together periodically and discuss topics of interest where, you know, where companies are willing to work together and share their data, but also where they think there's an unmet need where a public-private partnership could really make a step forward. And through these discussions, a topic text, a draft topic text is developed, and the budget is also begun to form. These topic texts then go for consultation with all the member states of Europe to make sure that it also ties in with what's already ongoing within the member states, and also ensures that the public part of the public-private partnership is also met. So where we are now is we've just finished this process, and we're about to launch the call. And this is where you come in as a consortium who will be applying for the call. So what happens now is the industry consortium kind of takes a step back, and we're looking at the publicly funded consortium only to put together a consortium consisting of, for example, academics, hospitals, SMEs, regulators, and so on. And the idea here is this consortium will address kind of half the topic, the publicly funded half of the topic, which is in the topic text. However, you have to do this bearing in mind that there is an industry consortium waiting to join you at stage 2. So your aim here is to apply for the public funding only, address the public tasks only, but put together a strong consortium. Once the short proposals are submitted, we have an evaluation where, and this is another difference from the Horizon 2020, at this evaluation, only the very best consortium, the very best proposal will go through to the next stage. So therefore, at this stage, it's very important that you're not only in a very good consortium, you're in the very best consortium. And therefore, one key bit of advice for you now is to spend a lot of time trying to get the right partners for your consortium, or seeking out a consortium that has some really good partners there already, because it's very good being in a good consortium which is going to put together a viable proposal, but it's a competition where only the top one wins, so you have to make sure you're in that top consortium. I would advise you to start doing this straight away, finding your partners. So following the evaluation, the first ranked proposal from stage 1 then merges with the industry consortium at stage 2, and again here this is the full consortium as we call it now. So on the slide I've kind of separated them in two to show you how the merger works, but ideally what we really want here is that we stop talking about public and private and we start to talk about one single consortium. And this is a key element to make sure the project works successfully, is that the expertise is fully shared, everybody's fully integrated, and people start to think of themselves as one single consortium. So at this stage then, the single full consortium puts together a much more detailed proposal with a detailed work plan of what's going to take place during the project. That is again evaluated by a panel of experts, and if it all goes well, Then we go to the grants finalization stage, which is focused on a lot of administrative detail, but also notably the consortium agreement, which is where a lot of the legal, intellectual property and governance issues are solved. And if that then works out, the project will be launched. So how to submit a proposal? Those of you who know IMI will know that we have been using our own proposal submission IT platform to date called Sophia. We are now moving to the Horizon 2020 platform, which is called SEP. The link is there. You go in there. If you're familiar with this, you will find it's much, much easier to use than Sophia. So you go in there, you will find our call there once the call is launched. You should hopefully find your organization already registered there, which means all the administrative detail is already available. You just have to click a button. If it's not there, then you have to register, but again, that's reasonably straightforward. And this tool will guide you through all the necessary information to put forward the proposal. So in the tool itself, it's a lot of admin detail, but the bulk of your proposal is going to be a Word document, which you will upload as a PDF, but the working document will be a Word document. And this is another slight difference between us and Horizon 2020 in that because the main competition for us is at stage 1, we have a slightly bigger template than Horizon 2020. To allow the experts to have sufficient information to make that important decision. So our page limit is 30 pages instead of 15, and we ask for additional information in terms of implementation, as you see there, section 3, and also some brief information on the participants in your proposal. And as I said, this is to ensure that the experts have sufficient information to make that decision. So my advice here is, again, is to look at the SEP submission tool as early as possible, just so that you're familiar with it, so that when you come to finalizing your proposal and submitting it, there's no last-minute surprises. The proposal template will be available in that submission tool. It's also available on the IMI website, so you can look at that straight away, and again, make sure you address those points. It's important as well to realize that during the evaluation, the expert evaluators will have basically 3 pieces of information to make sure that they evaluate your proposal properly. One is the call text, which you'll have seen on our website. One is your proposal itself, and the third are the evaluation criteria. So the evaluation criteria are on the screen now. There are 3 of them: excellence, impact, and implementation, which is on the next slide. I'm not going to go into these in detail. It's just important that when you're putting your proposal together, you realize this is what the experts will be using to evaluate you. So make sure you do consider these when putting your proposal together. And implementation is there now as well. So you can look at these in your own time. They're also available on the IMI website. Okay, so I've got just a few more slides to finish off, and these are focused on tips on how to put together a good quality proposal. So this is IMI2 call 10. We've had 11 calls in IMI1, so we've got a lot of experience on what makes a good proposal and what doesn't. So this is our advice based on that experience. First of all, make sure you read the call relevant material. So read the topic text. I'm sure you'll read that several times. At the bottom of the topic text document, not the current version on our website, but on the final version, there will be a section called Call Conditions. It's important to read these, and some of those links go to other documents. These are basically the rules that you will need to follow to put together your consortium. I've already mentioned it, and it's written here again as the second bullet point. Start forming your consortium early. This is probably one of the most important things you can do. So I have a slide on how to do this, but use your own networks as much as possible to find good quality partners. I've already said that you need to provide the reviewers with all the information they need to evaluate your proposal. You should be aware that the expert evaluators are instructed to only take account of the information within your proposal itself and not to go searching outside the proposal. So you need to include in the proposal everything they need to know. Finalize and submit your proposal early. Again, just to avoid any last-minute hiccups, I would suggest making sure you submit the day before the deadline, so if anything does go wrong, you still have a little bit of a buffer time. And if you have any questions, please do contact us in the office at infodesk@imi.europa.eu. A few common mistakes that people make. The first thing that happens to your proposal after it's been submitted and before it goes for evaluation is a very brief admissibility and eligibility check. These are just the minimum standards we need to have before we can evaluate your proposal. So if you don't submit your proposal on time, it will not even go through this check because we just will not get it at all. So that's the first thing. Make sure you do submit on time. We do still get emails after the deadline with people with problems submitting, so please do submit well in advance. So there is a minimum number of legal entities you have to have, and it is 3 legal entities from at least 3 member states. If you don't have this, then your proposal will not pass this check and will not go through to evaluation. So please do make sure you have this. You should get a warning in the tool if you don't, but yeah, so please, that's a minimum standard. Then more generally, one thing we find that proposals that are not successful is that they sometimes don't address all the objectives in the topic text. So it's important that everything in the text is what you should do. You should account for all the public budget and you should account for all the tasks allocated to the public consortium. Because if you do not, you will be scored lower and you probably will not be successful. Another thing which is very, very important for us at IMI and indeed the whole of the European Commission Horizon 2020 program is impact. It's one of the evaluation criteria. And this means that if you may have a really, really excellent proposal from a scientific point of view, but if you do not demonstrate how this will have an impact, and for IMI, how that impact will feed through to the patients, then you won't score very well in this criteria and you'll probably fail you probably won't be top ranked in the evaluation. So it's important to be scientifically excellent for sure, but also to have to demonstrate how that scientific excellence will have an impact. And as this is a public-private partnership, you have to make sure that you take into account the expertise of the industry consortium and show how they will be integrated into your proposal as well. So they're nearly finished, but one thing, as mentioned, is to find project partners. There are various mechanisms to do this. The first one, and probably the most important, is to network with your contacts. Really talk to people, reach out, be very proactive on this, reach out to people and say, look, I'm interested in putting a consortium together or joining a consortium. Do you know anyone? And so on. We recognize that IMI topics require a wide variety of expertise and your own network may not be sufficient. And therefore, we will share, as Alessandra said, we will share the details of its webinar. You can use that as a starting point to find other people. There are various partner search tools, such as listed on the screen now, which you should use. I would register for all of them. We have contact points in each member state under our state's representatives group. They are very, very familiar with IMI. Their role is to really help you find a good consortium, put together a good proposal. So I'd reach out for them for sure. They will help you. There are also health national contact points, which are have a similar role, so you can reach out to them. And of course, use whatever other networking methods you can think of, such as the IMI LinkedIn group, for example. So just to finish off, I have a slide on SME participation and one on patient participation. Both of these groups are extremely important to IMI. SMEs in particular can help really drive the outcomes of the project through to that very important impact on patients. So it's important to, if you can think there's an opportunity to include SMEs, to do so. And in this particular topic, you know, there's a lot of data, all IMI topics, a lot of data, so people with expertise on that will be very welcome. From the patient point of view, we really, you know, to ensure that you do have an impact on those patients, you can demonstrate that. I think it's important to try to think about embedding patients throughout an entire project. So any way you can do that. There are certain elements mentioned in the topic text, which I've kind of highlighted on the screen here. But there's also a section on our website, which the link is there, and that's where you can find out how to engage in patients, patient organizations, and so on, to really include them. And I think we in IMI, we recognize that the patient is just another type of expert, just like an academic researcher or a physician. They're the expert in their own illness, and therefore it's very important to include them. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Erica and ask her to introduce the topic from the topic writer point of view. Erica, please.
Thank you very much, Colin. Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Erica Nishimura. I'm a Scientific Vice President at Novo Nordisk, in charge of the insulin portfolio, and therefore understanding hypoglycemia is definitely within the scope of particularly our insulin projects. So if I start, what I'll do is I'll just run through these slides. The slide deck has been set up by the IMI, and I've sort of put in the information that was requested. And I believe at the end of the presentation, we'll be open for questions both through the chat and also by the phone. So the need for a public-private collaboration, I think in this particular project addressing hypoglycemia, I think we have a very unique opportunity to address the issue of hypoglycemia using the large data set that we as industry partners have collected. I'll go into the exact partners, but all the the major insulin producing companies, Lilly, Sanofi, and ourselves, are putting all of our data that has anything to do with hypoglycemia into this pool. And then as academic partners, you have the scientific insights and hopefully also the tools to basically go in and probe and analyze this pooled data set. And then from all of the hypotheses and correlations that will arise, hopefully from probing this data set, we'll be able to apply them further. And we have also on board a number of CGM, continuous glucose monitoring companies that will also bring in their data that they have collected using their particular CGM devices. So whatever we find out from probing the large clinical trial data set, we're able to also address the CGM data and see, test it out and see, do these hypotheses and correlations actually hold using more detailed CGM results. Again, some of these correlations, hypotheses that come out of probing the database can also be used in the preclinical space, where we may be able to use some of that information to address specific mechanisms using, for example, animal models. And also we can use this information to help us understand the impact of hypoglycemia, what it has on the patient, their social group, the impact on the economy, both of the patient but also of the society, and all that can be brought together in one of these work packages. And also, I think I've also tried to highlight the fact that with this public-private collaboration, we can bring in various different patient groups. They can influence what we do, what we ask of the database, and so that they can be part of both the research and also by being part of the looking at the impact of hypoglycemia. So that's the public-private collaboration, which I think is fairly straightforward. The objective of the project is very broad. At the end of the day, we'd like to be able to reduce the risk and the burden of hypoglycemia, and we'll be doing this through a series of various integrated activities. And here I've sort of just listed the sort of scope of what we hope to be able to accomplish. Starting from the research into the mechanisms, and this point is primarily the non-clinical studies looking into the mechanisms of counter-regulation, hypoglycemia, unawareness. Hopefully, by understanding these mechanisms, we may be able to target new ways of intervening in order to prevent the risk of hypoglycemia. The bulk of this project will be this pooled database. So definitely one of the major tasks of the consortium, both in collaboration with the industry and academic, is to put together this database. And we'll be capturing hypoglycemia data from across various different clinical trials from the different pharmaceutical companies. And in addition to that, we'll also have another database with the CGM data, primarily from the CGM companies. Then a major part of the program will be then to probe this database, and we'll have to sit down as a group, consortium between industry and the private, the public sector, to define the questions we'd like to address using this database. And then also we'll have the opportunity to look at the glucose monitoring technology. We may be able to define better ways of using CGM, for example. We'll also be able to look at best practices for clinical trials now that we'll be combining all of the clinical trial data from the different companies. Maybe we'll be able to standardize this. We hope to also shape some of the health economic outcomes so that we will be able to demonstrate the value of reducing hypoglycemia risk. We will certainly identify these more patient-driven research, and in particular look at the current PROs, the patient-reported outcomes, see how relevant the current ones are, and hopefully be able to design new PROs that we could use to specifically address hypoglycemia. And finally, we're opening a dialogue with the different regulatory agencies to be able to define the clinically meaningful endpoints so that these can be used by the regulatory authorities when they're discussing, for example, the label of new diabetes therapies. And I must say that the FDA and EMA have actually looked at this particular call topic text, and they've come with their review. So they are interested, although not a definite partner, but they would like to be on board perhaps as consultants. So that's also something to keep in mind. So the pre-competitive nature of this, we are bringing together both nonprofit organizations and the industry partners together in this consortium. We have a number of the FPA companies, and this includes Lilly, Sanofi, ourselves, Novo Nordisk, and then the three CGM companies, Abbott, Dexcom, and Medtronic. And all of these companies will be bringing their anonymized clinical trial data, and therefore it will be definitely non-competitive. So we're not going to be comparing one insulin against another or one therapy against another. It'll be all data based on hypoglycemia. And in addition to the FPA companies, we have on board several nonprofit associated partners. JDRF has been very active in putting together this call, and they are providing both in-kind contributions as well as monetary. Helmsley has also generously put in funds for this project. The Type 1 Diabetes Exchange, they're coming with their vast data set from their patient population. And the IDF has also said that they would contribute primarily with various different patients so that they can be involved in our patient advisory group. So that's the non-competitive group that we have put together. So the expected impact of this, there's a number of them, and I don't think I'll go through them in great detail, but definitely we would, at the end of the day, like to be able to have a much better understanding of the causes and impacts of hypoglycemia. And again, this will hopefully help guide the professionals in caring for people with diabetes, and definitely improve their glycemic control by also reducing the risk of hypoglycemia. We'll be working on preparing a standard guideline on how to measure the hypoglycemic episodes. The International Study Group for Hypoglycemia has just recently published their findings and guidelines, and I think we will probably stick very much to that. And what we will be striving for is to be able to, all of the companies use the same standard guidelines, definitions of hypoglycemia, so that when we do report to regulatory authorities, we all come with the same type of data collected in the same way, using the same definitions. And that hopefully will also make things a lot easier for the regulatory authorities. Also, we'll be able to, make some agreements on how to collect clinical and lab data from the clinical trials. So again, that we will be doing this in a standardized way for all of the clinical trials going forward. And if we go to the next slide, I think we have more, yes, expected impacts. Again, we're going back to the definitions of hypoglycemia. This will probably, again, be based a lot on the International Study Group on Hypoglycemia. Definitely at the end, we would like to be able to say that we can improve overall diabetes therapy, and again, be able to include patients in both the understanding of the hypoglycemia and also defining the effects so that the patients themselves have a better life. So next, I think we have, yes, the architecture of the project. The project is scheduled to have a duration of 4 years. That's currently in the call. And we also envision that at the end of those 4 years, we would like to expand or extend the project for 2 to 3 years, depending on the results. And one of the things we'd like to do in the extension period would be to apply whatever learnings we obtain from the probing of our clinical trial data and apply that to real-world data. This was something we discussed whether or not we would include now, but I think what we'd like to do it in more of a succession, starting with the big clinical trial data, then looking into the more detailed CGM data, and then finally going into the real-world data. And this would open up for new partners, possibly those that have access to more real-world data and some specific patient populations that we would be interested in. This may also open up for conducting new clinical trials using the standardized approaches and methodologies we've come up with in the main project, and will also ensure that we will have a good deal of continuity from the original project to the extension. But the way we've kind of designed the structure of the project, and this can be, I'm sure, discussed further and adapted based on the winning consortium, academic consortium, but we see it at these 7 project work packages. The first one, there's actually 8. The one is just more management, but we have preclinical, so this would be all the non-clinical work, looking primarily into the mechanisms of hypoglycemia. There will be a big work package on putting together the database, the different databases. A group working on analyzing the clinical data. A group specifically looking into the CGM technology, how we measure glucose. A group looking into the health economics, the consequences of hypoglycemia, the costs of hypoglycemia, the costs, savings of preventing hypoglycemia, etc. A group looking into the patient role, ensuring that the patient perspective is included in the questions that we ask of the clinical trial data, that they're included in the health economic research as well, and also in our discussions with regulatory authorities, particularly with respect to the PROs. So this is how we see the organization of the project. This is, it's not set in stone. This is something that can be redefined based on the final consortium. Okay. These a long list of what we expect from the academic applicants. First of all, regarding the non-clinical research, we'd like you as the academic group to come up with topics that would address the sort of the objectives we have in looking at the mechanisms of hypoglycemia, and these projects would then be mostly carried out by joint postdoctoral fellows, students, etc. So we're really looking forward to seeing what kind of project ideas that you have in this area. Of course, a big chunk of this work will be to establish this combined database. We'll expect that you or whoever is going to be doing the working on the data, establishing the database, would be able to harmonize all the data, because even though we're all coming with sort of standardized data, the data will eventually have to be harmonized so that we have one central database. You would definitely be involved in putting together all the clinical questions and queries, executing out these analyses, interpreting the data, presenting the data, etc. You may be able to provide additional clinical cohorts with data sets, maybe particularly certain patient populations that may be of interest that we don't have included, we haven't got included in our clinical data bases. Working on this standardization of definitions, evaluating the glucose monitoring technology, assessing the sort of the impact of the hypoglycemia, and again bringing in the patients, looking at the current PROs and developing new ones, looking at the economic consequences of hypoglycemia, and then again establishing processes for engaging with regulatory authorities. So basically we'd like to have the academic consortium involved in all aspects of this particular project. So the next slide is what we as the industry will be contributing with. For the non-clinical part, what we would be doing, we would be contributing sponsorship of these postdocs and students in order to conduct the non-clinical research projects. We see it as a collaboration so that it would be possible for these postdocs to work not only in your labs, but maybe come out to our labs for a period, etc. And the postdocs would have co-supervision from both the industry and the academia. We as industry in the research area would also be able to provide access to whatever in-house animal models and cellular and molecular tools that we may have that could be useful for these non-clinical activities. Our people would also be definitely involved from the industry side in probing the clinical databases. So we're not only going to just hand over the data and then have the academic look into it. We would also like to be involved in the actual probing of the database. And we'll also be providing the data in standardized format, but again, as I mentioned, it would definitely have to be harmonized into a single database. We would also be participating in basically all the work package groups. Okay, next slide. Yeah, what's in it for you? I think we've kind of covered most of this. As academic research, you have this unique access to this extensive clinical trial data set that we have established by pooling the data from all of these industry partners. You'll have the opportunity to collaborate with researchers in industry on these common projects of interest. You'll be also involved in working with these patients and nonprofit organizations. And we really hope that we'll be able to come up with some new insights into hypoglycemia that we would be able to apply in order to provide better diabetes care for the patients. And was that it? Oh no, then there's a whole long list of key deliverables, basically similar to what we've covered in the scope, establishing the database, agreeing upon these definitions, understanding how to design these trials and analyzing the data, generation of information that would eventually help in understanding the mechanisms of hypoglycemia that we could maybe apply to designing completely new treatments for diabetes that will not give hypoglycemia. And then also exploring the relationship between the clinical database that we have from the pharmaceutical companies and comparing that to what has been observed using CGM. And then one more, I think, slide of key deliverables. Yeah, so again, strong evidence of the utility of these non-lab CGM data, these assessments of patient data and patient input, and again, the discussion of the regulatory. So I think we've kind of covered this over and over again, but I hope you can see that we have a very broad scope of this project, and we really would like to be able to see that you come with your unique competencies to carry out this project. And I think now that must be the end, isn't it? Yes. So I think with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions, either by the phone or through the chat function. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Erica. So while we wait for questions to come in, let me remind all the participants today that you can ask questions in two ways. Either send it by the chat function, so just sending the question in writing, we can read that aloud for you, or you can also use the raise or lower your hand button, and we can unmute you in case you want to speak directly to Erica or to my colleague Colin. So I see that there is a question coming in from Paul Houston, who is asking what is the expected kickoff of the project. The timeline, Paul, has to be still defined, and we will be able to confirm a little bit more precisely how it will work out once the call is launched. So at this stage, it is very hard to predict and give exact indication on the timing.
Just to add to that, Paul, so we're hoping the call will be launched in the coming days, and that the evaluation process, grant agreement process, and so on, generally takes about a year. So it's normally a year from call launch to the project can actually kick off.
There is a question from Bastian asking if it is allowed to have consortium partners from outside the EU, for example, USA or Australia.
Okay, I'll take this as well. So in my slides, you'll have seen already that I mentioned the minimum number of partners you have to have, which is 3 legal entities from at least 3 member states. So that's the minimum. Once you've passed that requirement, then you can have partners from anywhere. That's not a problem. However, you should note that the funding can only go to those in the European Union, or there's also what we call Horizon 2020 associated countries, which are things like Norway, Iceland, Israel, and so on. So yeah, those are the ones that get funding, but partners can come from anywhere. They will have to provide their own funding though.
Andrea is asking about a recent position statement. I will try to read that out. Andrea, perhaps I was just thinking that it's a bit too complicated to read it aloud, but in any case, this is about a joint position statement of the American Diabetes Association and the European Association for the Study of Diabetes. It looks like that they were almost everything. Andrea, perhaps if I can unmute you, if you don't mind, and maybe you can ask directly your question to Erica, just because otherwise it could be a bit hard for me to understand the message. I've unmuted you, Andrea, in case you want to ask Erica your question.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yes, I can.
Okay. There has been this very recent paper published on, I don't remember, diabetes care, where there has been this position statement coming from several scientists, mostly from UK, defining most of the endpoints of this, this grant proposal or innovative medicine initiative. So it looks like that. They, let's say, anticipated this program. So I wonder how can we cope with this?
Yeah, so I think that is what I was referring to when I was mentioning the guidelines that have come out from this international study group on hypoglycemia, and that was the paper that was published in Diabetes Care very recently. So I think this would be the starting point, and I think what we can actually do is now take those guidelines and see, does it really fit with the data that we have from the clinical trials? I think based on that, we would kind of use it almost as like a test of these particular guidelines or parameters and definitions that have been already published. So I think this is what we were anticipating. We were actually hoping that the information from the international study group would be in the public domain before we set up this launch, because we didn't want to basically repeat what has already been done through the study group. So now what we'll be able to do is take those definitions and see, does it really fit with what's actually happening in our clinical trials? Is it something that also is happening that we can see in the CGM data that we'll be getting from the companies. So yeah, I think in one way the International Study Group has sort of paved the way, really, for what we'll be trying to do here in this program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, for the question. Thank you, Erika, for taking it. We have another one from Stephanie Lazinger from Ulm University. Stephanie says, we are able to provide a large diabetes database using data of the Diabetes Follow-Up Registry, DPV, currently more than 400,000 diabetes patients. Is it possible to be part of the project providing registry data?
As I mentioned, we had kind of seen our project in 3 steps. So the first step would be using data from our own clinical trials, which are fairly well-controlled studies, and maybe not reflecting exactly real life. Then we have the more granulated data from the CGM, looking at more detailed data, minute to minute, if you want to say, and that would also be included in this. And the way we've kind of envisioned this particular program was that then afterwards, in the extension period, then we would go into the registries where the very large number of patients are included, where we have real-life data, and that's really there where I think your type of database with the 400,000 Swedish patients would be of extreme value. But I think for the scope of this particular call, we'd like to keep it within the clinical trial data and the CGM data. Now, this again may change based on what the consortium has to bring to the table. If this is something that will be readily accessible, easy to do already in the early stages, it might be possible, but the way we have written it now, we would like to include the real-world data in the extension period.
Thank you, Erika. Thank you. We have a couple of questions coming in. So the first one is from Winfried, asking if cell culture modeling would be initial modeling of biological barriers, e.g. the role and changes at the blood-brain barrier and communication to cells of the central nervous system.
Certainly, I think that is extremely exciting, and I don't know if it was in that detail in the call topic text, but we definitely would like to see how we can understand better the role of the brain in hypoglycemia, and also how our various therapies affect the brain in order to regulate hypoglycemia. So definitely even the cell culture work would be very applicable to this consortium. So I think what you do is then you come with your ideas, you come with your proposal, and that becomes included in the work package on the research into the mechanisms of hypoglycemia, and there will be funds for example, a postdoc to work on that particular cell culture system and to address some of these questions, particularly on the role of the brain and how do some of these therapies access the brain, etc. So definitely, I think that would be within the scope of this project.
Thank you, Erika. We have Winnie who would like to know how people living with diabetes can be involved in the research project. Will patients be evaluating some of the results or being consulted in the process?
Yeah, and that's something that will definitely be discussed in one of the work packages. So we have a work package 7 defined as the patient role. So we can see the patient being involved in several different levels. One of the levels would be we would have some designated patients as consultants for the project. And I think these patient advisory group will be put together from the organization. So I think JDRF, IDF, they will be asked to identify patients that could work on this advisory board to give insight, the patient insights to what we're doing in this project. But on top of that, I think that both the Work Package 6 and Work Package 7, looking into, for example, the consequences of hypoglycemia, we would definitely be looking at, including patients in various different surveys, I would imagine, in evaluating the PROs, defining new PROs. I would imagine that these groups would be reaching out to certain patients. But I think exactly how that's going to be done, this is something that will be hashed out when the final consortium is selected, and we'll work together with the academic consortium and the academic part, the industry partners and the patient groups like JDRF and IDF in order to find out how best we can involve the patients. But definitely, yes, we would like to see a good deal of patient input into what we're doing in this project.
We now have a question from Rory, who says, you mentioned preclinical research in animal cell models, but not early stage research in humans, such as examining counter-regulatory responses by genotype. Is this something you have considered?
Yes, actually we have considered this. So I think even though we have sort of defined Work Package 2 as preclinical, if there are good suggestions for sort of more early stage clinical trials, that may be something that could be included. It would again have to fit into the budget. So when we put together this budget, we did not anticipate doing very many clinical studies because, as you know, the cost of clinical studies are a lot higher than the non-clinical studies. But if you have some good ideas on how to conduct relatively simple, small clinical trials in order to address some of these mechanistic questions, I think it should be possible. Although we had also thought that new clinical trials would be more, again, part of the extension period. But, I think, again, what we need to do is look at the proposals that are coming from the academic consortium and see, does it really fit in with the entire sort of scope. And if there's a good clinical study that addresses definitely some of these mechanisms, then I would assume that it fits. But it will really depend on the way that the consortium is going to be put together.
And a follow-up question from Rory is, most trials examine people who do not have an awareness, so do you envisage we can access this population through established bioresources for genotyping, etc.?
Yeah, so the hypoglycemic unaware patients. Good question. And I'm not sure how well characterized the patients in the type 1 diabetes exchange and database is, and this may be something that could be tapped into. I know they have a very, very large database of patients, and I would assume that some of them are unaware, hypoglycemic unaware patients. And so this may be something that we can include in the final proposal, is to sort of try to pull out that group of unaware patients and be able to look at their characteristics separately. Otherwise, we could include that again in the extension period and and include that in the call, and hope that there are centers out there that have access to this defined group of patients.
Thank you, Erica. Now we have a few questions, and I think that networking is the answer. We have Andrea saying that they have already interesting preclinical data on hypo unawareness on mice. What are they supposed to do and search your partners but how? So, Andrea, the best is always to try and activate your network. You can also use, as mentioned in column slides, the partner search tools that IMI offers, but there's also one offered by Fit for Health and another one offered by the German National Contact Point. In addition, we are going to circulate the registration list for this webinar as well. So that gives you also a very good base of people that are interested in submitting a proposal. And that's a very good resource in case you want to get in touch with people and say, try to form up a group for an application. We also have Marta from Hospital de Getafe in Madrid, who is really interested in participating in the project. They have a database from EU-funded project of about 700 elderly patients. So Marta is suggesting to include a cohort with elderly patients due to the few cohorts that are working with a special population. Marta, same answer here. The best is to discuss these ideas with potential partners if you are interested in submitting a proposal. So once you find a network of partners, you can discuss all of this, and this can be part of your proposal. Winfred is asking if the proposals for preclinical ideas for example, working package 2 should be sent to Erika Nishimura. Winfred, no. Any contact from an applicant consortium and an FPA representative is actually discouraged, because this could give rise to a conflict of interest. So if you want to contact anyone within IMI concerning an application, please do contact the IMI Executive Office. But any ideas for work package work should be actually discussed within the applicant consortium, and then it should be part of your proposal. Let me see again if there's something else. So Marta, I'm reading your second question, and I think it was covered in the first answer, but please, in case you have any other doubts, feel free to use the raise hand button, and I will unmute you in case you want to speak to us directly for any other questions. So Jacob is asking if ethical considerations should be already considered at stage 1 of the proposal.
This is Colin again. So, Jakob, it's important to be sure that anything you propose will not have difficulty passing any ethics assessment, even at stage 1. However, there is no formal assessment at this stage, and it is not required within the proposal template at stage 1. At stage 2, there is another section to the proposal template, section 5, which is exactly on ethics. And this is also evaluated by dedicated ethics experts. So you have to go into a lot of detail there, but and therefore that's the place where it's really assessed. However, it's probably a good idea to have an idea of whether you have any problems at stage 1, but it's not necessary to put that in your proposal. It's not actually requested in the proposal.
So we don't have any more questions. We're probably going to wait a few seconds to see if there's any last-minute requests before we close the webinar. So I think this is it, because there's no other question coming in. I would like to invite you to follow our updates very closely to see when the call is going to be launched. You can do this by checking our Twitter account, our LinkedIn group as well. It's a very good way to network with potential webinar participants. And if you have any other question, you're more than welcome to contact IMI at the address info-imi.europa.eu. There's a very final question by Bastian, who is asking if it is required to include at least one SME in stage 1.
The quick answer to that is no, so long as you meet the basic criteria of 3 organizations from at least 3 member states, then it's okay. However, as I said, we would encourage you to involve SMEs, because we think that's a good way of ensuring that the results of the project do have an impact, and therefore maybe under the impact criteria this could become important.
Thank you, Colin. So if there's no more questions, perhaps we could thank Erica very much for your presentation and the slides that you've prepared, for all the work that was put into the topic preparation. Thank you, Colin, for helping us today answer all the questions, and thank all of you for participating. We wish you all the best for any applications that may come through on this topic. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thanks for joining, and I look forward to seeing your applications. Bye.
Thank you, Erica. Bye-bye.